Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. I am Jason Romano, and this is the Sports Spectrum podcast. As always, we appreciate you listening and tuning in, subscribing to that podcast. Click that subscribe button on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and never miss an episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. And of course, all of our content can be found at sportspectrum.com, our website. Check it out. All the content at sportspectrum.com. Today on the show, Dansby Swanson is our guest, the Atlanta Braves shortstop. Now, Dansby was selected first overall, the number one pick in the 2015 MLB Draft by the Arizona Diamondbacks, and thinking that his career was going to be taking place in Arizona, he was ready to go on that path. And then 6 months later, the business of baseball gets in the way, and Dansby's traded by Arizona to Atlanta, where he is now with the Braves on December 9th, 2015. Again, Dansby, a hometown boy in Georgia, born in Kennesaw, raised in Marietta, Georgia, and all of a sudden finds himself as a member of the Atlanta Braves. Dansby played his college ball at Vanderbilt in Nashville, and he was the College World Series most valuable player in 2014 as a sophomore. And Dansby has been in the majors now 2 full seasons, 2017 being his first full season, and last year being his second full season. And it didn't end great. The team did really well, Atlanta winning the division, the National League East, and going into the playoffs. But Dansby suffered a wrist injury and wasn't able to participate in the playoffs with the Braves, and had to overcome and deal with this injury, this wrist injury that he had surgery on back in November of 2018. So on this podcast, we get a health update. We find out how he's doing, and it's, spoiler alert, it's good. And then we talk about his faith and how his faith has played a role not only in his life, but in dealing with setbacks, including the setback of having a wrist injury like he had. We also hear a great Derek Jeter story, which I really enjoyed hearing from him and his time spending with Dansby. And then we talk about a little deeper issue on the spiritual side, prayer. Prayer is vital to Dansby's life. And we talk a little bit about prayer and what prayer is. And there's so many, I think, that are in the faith community and the Christian community that struggle with prayer and struggle with praying. And Dansby kind of shares a little bit about how he's prayed to God and why prayer is so vital to his life. He also has a great story about the day he made his Major League Baseball debut, which I really enjoyed there too. So let's get to it. I think you guys will really like this. I love talking to Dansby. He's a great dude. Dansby Swanson from the Atlanta Braves, our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Take a listen. Dansby, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed listening to some in the past, and I'm excited to be able to be on one.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on as well. We really appreciate you joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Let's start with your health, because we'd be remiss if we didn't ask about how you're doing. We're taping this in late 2018, right at the end of the year, and you had surgery on your left wrist in November of 2018, so about a month or so ago, after suffering a torn ligament at the end of the season. How's your health now? How are you doing? How's the recovery going?
It's going good. Obviously, anytime you get surgery, it's never too fun, but at the same time, it's nice kind of having the peace of mind knowing that, the issues are taken care of and be able to get off to a healthy start and all that kind of stuff. Because with baseball, wrists and hands are kind of your everything. And so being able to essentially kind of get that off my chest a little bit is nice, and looking forward to a good 2019 and a healthy one.
How's the timetable look for that? Can I ask you what the timetable is, or is it going to be ready for spring training? How does that look?
Yeah, definitely expected full recovery by spring. Just kind of like a slow progression with range of motion and strengthening until that point. So obviously it's slow, just like any surgery would be, but at the same time I'm getting healthier every day, which is a nice thing. Tell
me about when you suffer an injury like that and you find out it's going to be, your team's going to participate in a playoff run. I have to imagine the emotions are very difficult, but coming from a faith perspective, because this is a faith and sports podcast, how does your walk with the Lord, you suffer an injury like that, how does your faith play a role in helping you deal with it?
I think there's a couple different ways that I've been able to look at it, because when it first happened, obviously, it was tough. on me, and I'd be lying if I said I handled it just very good, and
Of
like that I
course.
was just completely fine with it.
Yeah.
Being a competitive kid, like that's all I want to do is play. That's all I want to do is win and help my teammates. And so for a couple of days right after it happened, I actually went back to Atlanta while the team was still finishing out the season, and I was like in a bad place. I really was, and I ended up talking to my girlfriend and admitting to her, which I don't do very often, like that. Hey, I'm not like doing too good. Like kind of need some help.
Yeah.
And she just kind of like gave it to me what I needed to hear, and I started to realize, like faith comes honestly in a couple different ways for me, because obviously there's strength that can be drawn from you know God Himself, and and through prayer, which has always been kind of more of my way of dealing with things, through prayer and like feeling like I'm talking. Um, and so there's one way of dealing with it with that, but also at the same time, I've realized over the years that He's given me certain people in my life that help me get through that. So it may not be strictly through like faith and the traditional way of like Bible study and praying. It's
Sure.
more so of the things that He's done circumstantially, like around me, that allows me to kind of get through it and be able to kind of take strength from those people around me that love me and are loyal and are great friends, girlfriend, family, all of that. And so with those people being in place, I kind of realized like that was more of my gift, was being able to rely on them for, the strength and the guidance.
You mentioned prayer as an important part of your life. Tell me about that and I mean, prayer. Listen, we have a lot of Christians who listen to this podcast, obviously Christians who love sports, but we don't talk a lot about prayer and the whole idea of communicating with God. Tell me about what that looks like for you.
Well, it's always been something that I've done consistently. So that's why I say it's always been a big part of me, because that's kind of the one thing that I always felt was something that I could do every day and that tied in more to my personality. And I feel like my whole life I never really understood what it was that I was praying, like how you should pray, what you should say, what you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And when I started to realize that it was a lot about just really conversation, even if you're not necessarily physically hearing something back, that you're able to kind of almost like have like a little therapy meditation session almost. And I say that by saying like I feel like I can get things out of my head that are bothering me or that I'm struggling with, or things that I'm thankful for, that I'm joyful and happy to have in my life. I can kind of present all that to someone and really know and understand that someone is listening. And one way that I really started to get involved with it was I started doing a prayer journal, which I'll admit I haven't been as good at lately, but um, I had a prayer journal that I would, write down every night things I was praying about, things I was struggling with, or things I was thankful for, or things that I was asking about, and all that kind of stuff. And when you log it, not only are you saying it, but you're writing it down, and you can kind of go back and see like how things are answered, whether you realize it or not. And you kind of like start to get an understanding of, wow, God answered this in a much different way than I anticipated, or, He did this that really, allowed me to shine in a different light. And so it's kind of nice to be able to go back and see how things have been answered. And it kind of just gives you that gratefulness every day, and I'd wake up a little bit more grateful, and I'd wake up, being in a better place because of the log of my prayers and what I was, thinking about at that time.
There's a lot of people I see even in my church up here in Connecticut that struggle with prayer because they don't feel like they either know enough about the Bible or God, or don't sound like they need to sound like a specific way in order to pray. Do you encounter that in your prayer life, or have you ever encountered that, or maybe even encourage someone who is struggling with just praying?
Honestly, the best advice I ever got was to start. I mean, there's not like a formula to it. There's not an equation that has to be fit. I think when I started to realize that I could just kind of say what was on my mind, whether I was happy, sad, mad, frustrated, joyful, like whatever it was, I could present that and somehow like get it off my chest, but start to realize and understand that those prayers were being answered, whether it was the answer I wanted or whether it was just me kind of getting the everyday assurance that I was doing the right things or whatever it may be. That's kind of what has helped me, is just understand like, man, this is just more of a conversation like I would have with my friends or I would have with my family. Instead of trying to say like, okay, I'm talking to the creator of, the universe. And like, I need to be really careful in what I say and what I don't say. Like, because at the end of the day, if he's all knowing, then he knows everything that you're thinking. And I think that he's a real honest and faithful God that wants to hear what it is that we are feeling at that time, because he wants us to know what we want, and he is loving enough to, to act on those things.
Dansby Swanson is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Tell us where that faith journey began for you, kind of your testimony and when you walked and started walking with the Lord.
For me, growing up obviously in the South and in Atlanta, I've always been a part of church. Like that was what we did every Sunday. We'd go to church, and being involved in some different youth stuff. But with all the sports that I played, it was hard to really, really get involved because, travel baseball, you're playing every Sunday. And, I was really blessed to be surrounded with people that thought just like me and that valued the same things as I did. And so, I was always like a good kid, and, I went off to college and I started to get a better understanding of what it meant to me, and started to understand that there is a little bit of a difference between just going to church and living a life that is required of us, to become who we're supposed to be. And so that's kind of been my journey lately, is really trying to live out my faith just by, it could be as simple as loving other people or treating people the right way, because I'm not a guy that's going to necessarily go and just talk about Jesus with people, but I will show what I believe in just by how I act and how I treat people and how I handle situations, and trying to be graceful. And, I'm not perfect and I mess up plenty of times, but at the end of the day, I feel like we're called to serve and love other people. And by doing that more and more, you really kind of shine God's love, whether you talk about it or not.
And you're living the dream in terms of being a baseball player, but in many ways, even more than that, playing baseball for the team that you grew up watching, I'm guessing, in Marietta, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. Let's go back to, say, 2004, Dansby, and you're 10 years old and you're just living life, right? And baseball's probably a big part of it. But who were some of your heroes as a kid, and what was life like as a kid growing up in Georgia?
Well, I guess I'm one of those rare kids that ever since I was little, played baseball and basketball, and I just knew that sports was what I was supposed to do. And for whatever reason, most likely a God calling, just knew that baseball was supposed to be my thing, that I was supposed to play in the major leagues, and that's what I was going to do. And ever since I was that age, I worked to be where I am now. Like my decisions, the choices I made were to be where I am now. And so it's pretty neat, especially just kind of knowing my story as far as not being highly recruited, pretty much being undersized and underrated most of my life, and then shining, at a very high level in college, and then kind of going from there to get to where I am now. It's given me kind of unique perspective on all of it, and has allowed me to really share that story and help others get through the same types of things, which is neat. And like I said, and heroes, definitely my family. I'm blessed with an incredible family. My parents are phenomenal people, and my whole family played college athletics. So like I grew up on a baseball field. Like that's just where I grew up, was always being on a baseball field. And I grew up, in church and surrounded by faith. And, but as far as baseball heroes would go, I was always a big Nomar Garcia-Parra fan. He was always one of my favorites. And then obviously Derek Jeter, and just how his approach to the game mentally and physically. And I was always just drawn to the winning and the leadership, because I just see it that is what takes teams and people to the next level. It's nice winning, but it's also nice winning on a very, very high level, and doing it the right way, and how you treat people and how you treat your teammates, and trying to make everyone around you better, as opposed to just getting your stats. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you ever have that moment of meeting your heroes, or coming in contact with them, and or even not Jeter or Nomar, but it could have been somebody else, and you were just like, oh, that's that guy, and I'm meeting him right now, and you kind of have this starstruckness going through your brain?
It was honestly kind of a combo of both of them. I remember seeing Nomar came to one of our games when I was a junior. We were actually out at UCLA, and he lives out in LA.
That's right.
And he came to one of our games. So just like seeing him in the stands and stuff was really awesome for me. Like it wasn't necessarily nerve wracking. It was just one of those things like, wow, this is awesome. Like this is a guy that I grew up trying to emulate. and he's here watching us play. And then I'm with the same agency that handled Jeter's whole career, and so I've been able to make connections with him. And I was in New York during part of the off season, I guess, in 2016 or 15. I can't remember which year, but I was able to go to an event that he was hosting with the Players Tribune, and I got to go, and I wanted to go meet him. And so I went, and I got to meet him, and like just having him spend the time, like an hour. Seriously, we just he kind of ignored, not in a bad way, but just kind of ignored all the other people around, and we just sat there and talked for an hour straight, just about baseball, about life, how to handle situations, how to handle teams, and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty neat, and he is very, very much the guy that you anticipate him to be, with everything that's been hyped around who he is and what he believes in and all that stuff. So it was cool.
That's awesome. Now, I wonder for you, because you said you were kind of came in not as highly touted when you're going into college, and then all of a sudden this success, and if you want to call it fame, whatever you want to call it, comes when you go to Vanderbilt, most valuable player of the College World Series in 2014. I wonder how that was for you, just handling that success, and suddenly your platform's bigger and dealing with this sort of sudden fame. What was that like?
It was actually an extremely big time blessing that I was at Vanderbilt, because the teammates I was surrounded with and the coaching staff I was surrounded with had handled that same kind of level of success before. Mm-hmm. And so being surrounded by people that believed the same things I believed, and enjoyed playing the game how I enjoyed it, and looked up to me for who I was, allowed me to continue to shine for that. People didn't love me per se because of what I did on the field, but it was more of who I was and how I treated the other people, around the team in the locker room. So I was almost praised more for that. So it led me to want to do that even more. And it kind of canceled out the outside expectations and the noise, because it was all about the winning, and it was all about, being something bigger than yourself. So instead of it being about individual statistics and, the accomplishments, it was about everyone else, which is what I enjoy. And so it allowed me to just shine that personality even more.
So you didn't see, and I'll even fast forward to 2015, and you're the number one draft pick overall by Arizona. You didn't see a lot of change in the people around you, or just the way people were acting suddenly when you are this number one draft pick prospect?
Not the people that knew me. That's because that was the real unique thing that I had been blessed with, was those people, and that they valued me as me instead of all the outside success. So like I said, I was able to continue to shine that personality and be ultimately who I am, and who I want to be. So having those people was like the best thing ever, because it allowed me to just dive into more about being the best me and helping all the people around me.
Dansby Swanson's our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. So 6 months after you get drafted number one overall by Arizona, you get a taste of the baseball business pretty quickly, and you're traded to the Atlanta Braves, where you are now. What was your reaction when that took place?
Oh, I was not happy.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, and and most people think I'm crazy for saying that, but at that point, I wasn't sure that I was ready to be back home. I was kind of looking forward to, kind of starting, I guess, a new life somewhere else, and being able to make my mark. And, I'd made it up in my mind that that's where I was wanting to be, and that's who I was going to be. And, being such a loyal person, and, committing to a team that had thought highly of me, that's where all my loyalty went. All my eggs went in that basket. And, I was looking forward to making – I basically just saw the vision that they had, and I wanted to be a part of it. And so when that vision got taken away, it kind of took me back a little bit, because I just expected the same thing in return, with the loyalty and stuff like that. And definitely got a quick taste of what business is like. And, it did take a little bit of a toll on me, just because at the time I didn't know that's what I needed or wanted. But in retrospect, looking back at it, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because the people that I've met, certain things that never would have happened that have now happened, are just tremendous.
Yeah. And then August 17th of 16, you make your Major League Baseball debut with that hometown team. What do you remember most about that day and getting that call up to the big leagues?
It's actually some of a funny story. I was in Mississippi and I got a call, and for some reason I didn't have this number saved, and I don't normally answer numbers that I don't have.
Right.
But I was like, I should probably answer this, and I answer it, and it's like, hey, we want you here in Atlanta tomorrow, and so I was like, okay, well, like it's 5.5 hours from Mississippi back home. Like, get in my car and drive. Well, my truck was actually in the shop getting something fixed, and I hadn't had time to go pick it up yet. And I like was getting ready to leave, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I have a rental car right now. Like I don't even have my car. So I actually had to rush over. It was like 15 minutes before they closed. I called them and told them, like, can you please stay open? Like I basically have like an emergency. I need to be able to get my truck and leave. So they were kind enough to stay open. I went, dropped my car off, got my truck, and piled it up and headed home. And then I got home. My parents waited up for me. Got home, and the next day I was, in the starting lineup, and it's just so neat seeing the love and outpouring of that love from family and friends that drove to come see me and that wanted to be a part of something special. Because yes, I did a lot of work and I put in a lot of hours to get to where I am, but it never would have been able to happen without the people around me. And so that was honestly the best part, was being able to enjoy that moment with the people that helped me get there.
What was that welcome to the major leagues moment for you? Was it that opening day, that opening game, that first game you ever played, or was there a moment when you were like, "Oh, I'm here now. Okay, this is a little different."
Um, I, honestly, like, and people probably think I'm crazy for this too. I wasn't really nervous for my first game. Like, I was already kind of tired from driving so far, and like, I had prepared for that moment my whole life, so I was ready. I had envisioned it, and I was just ready to succeed in that moment. Um, but I think over time, like starting to face certain guys, certain pitchers, and see certain hitters and stuff like that, I was like, wow, like I'm in the big boy world now. Like this is grown man ball. So I mean, it's just kind of like been a combination of those couple things that kind of gave me my welcome to the big leagues moment. It's not necessarily one exact time. It's more just kind of like all of the moments in one.
What's the toughest thing about being a baseball player? And we'll even say a major league baseball player, because you've been a baseball player your whole life practically. But being in the majors, what's the toughest thing that maybe people don't realize about being a baseball player?
I think it's just the mental grind. I know we have such a long season physically, but that's honestly easy in comparison to, playing every day is easy in comparison to mentally getting ready every day, because it takes so much more energy and effort um, out of you, and with the travel and your sleep and, the anxiety that can come from it, and the outside pressures and all that kind of stuff that you have to handle a little bit more individually, as opposed to, like a program like, Vandy, when you're kind of all in it together. It's not that we're not together and we're not close as a team, but it's just a different way of operating than it is in college. So, um, the mental stresses and grind of having to deal with media every day and just all the little extra things that can kind of pile up over time really do take a toll on you. And I think that most people don't necessarily realize that this is a game of failure, and so at times when you fail, it's not because you're trying to, it's just kind of part of the game. And so, people sometimes, fail to recognize that, and dealing with that on your own level when you want to be so great and you want to be perfect and this and that. Like, baseball is not a game where you are perfect. And so kind of come to the realization that, hey, as hard as I try, like sometimes I'm not going to be perfect. Sometimes I fail, and that's okay, but I will like fix it and get better.
Mm-hmm. What's faith in the clubhouse look like? It's been 2 full years you've been with the Braves now, 2 full seasons, I should say. What does that look like? How are you able to stay? You talk about the mental side of it and the difficulty of it, but what about the spiritual side during such a long season and staying grounded in your faith?
It can be tough. Like I said, prayer is a big part of me. So,
Yeah.
prayer before games, and obviously prayer before I go to bed and in the mornings, um, definitely helps kind of ease you a little bit. But they do such a great job of having, chapel on Sundays, whether you're at home or on the road, and everyone's on the same program. So the consistency is the same. And then we have a great chaplain in Atlanta. Um, he does such a good job doing Bible studies when we're at home, and we're able to get a taste more of the actual Bible study aspect, more so than just necessarily the faith and prayer. And it's also nice, like having family and friends, and I like I like to talk, and so when it's good to be able to talk to friends, and my girlfriend's really spiritual as well, so like we're able to talk about things, and we actually me and my girlfriend have been reading The Circle Maker
Yeah.
by Mark Batterson. So
Yep.
Being able to kind of read that and talk about certain things has kind of helped grow our faith. And it's not easy because, she's a professional athlete as well. So her schedule is just as busy and crazy as mine. So it's very easy to get sidetracked. But just sometimes, honestly, just the down to earth, conversations about God and what he's doing and just different aspects of faith kind of helps you grow just in a different light. Because I think it's just important to talk about it. It is to do strictly just a Bible study. It kind of helps you exert it, into the community and around other people.
Is there a Bible verse that's maybe been encouraging to you or helped you most or meant to you the most, whether it's in your journey throughout these years or even just recently?
I think my biggest one has always been, Proverbs 3:5 through 6. It just is such a good reminder that we don't always understand what's going on, but that it's a big deal to trust in God and what he's doing, and that we may not have the answer, but that's okay. I think that we've kind of been led astray in society to always feel like we need an answer, that we should have an answer, that, in school, you should always have the answer. If you're taking a test, you have the answer. Well, sometimes in life, like, you really don't have an answer. You don't have a logical answer. And kind of going back and saying, you know what, well, that's what faith is understanding and being willing to participate in something when you don't have the answer, because it's going to lead you, on the right path. And, sometimes that is a struggle, because I was a smart kid, so I like answers. I like being told. I like answers. I like figuring things out. And sometimes, the only way to figure it out is to continue to walk down that path, even if it is, dark, or even if it is, tough on you, that is really what's going to help you grow to shine more.
Yeah, and that verse is my life verse too. And I love the verse 6 that says, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path and make your path straight." And is that something you've seen, that even though it's not the most clear, perfect, straight path in the mind of yourself and how you envisioned it, it's still a perfect path because you're acknowledging God?
Absolutely. And I mean, I've seen that just with sometimes, when you aren't, um, succeeding how you want to on the baseball field, sometimes that leads you to better things in life. And, it's definitely done that for me in certain circumstances and stuff. So it's neat to see, but it's not fun going through. And I think that sometimes
Yeah.
we lose sight of that. It's not fun sometimes. That's okay though. It's not always about always being happy, which is kind of been a big movement. It's well, just be happy, just be happy. Well, if you're doing that, you're really only living a half life, in my opinion. You need to go through the down times, you need to go through the sad times in order to be whole, which at the end of the day is what we're kind of called to do, is be a whole person. And that with that comes frustrations, and it comes sadness, and there's happiness, and there's definitely blessings and thankfulness. But at the same time, you have to experience it all in order to become who it is that you're supposed to become.
Yeah, I've heard it said that there's purpose in the pain, which is it's sort of a cliche word, and it's not the easiest way to kind of go through it when you're in the midst of it. But there usually is, when you look back, the purpose that you can see in going through the down times. Let me ask you this, Dansby, as we close here, a couple more questions with Dansby Swanson on the podcast. What is all things loyal? Because as I Google your name and I search through some of the things that you're working through, certainly baseball comes up, but then I see all things loyal. So tell me about that and what that is, and why it came about, how it came about.
So it started out as a movement and initiative to tribute different aspects of the city of Atlanta, specifically to how I grew up, whether that was through music, entertainment, just different aspects that had shaped my life, whether it was faith, Southern hospitality, the Falcons. I'm a huge rap music guy, so whether it was Outkast or Jeezy or Migos or whoever it is that kind of helped shape me to who I am now, I wanted to tell that story. But at the same time, I wanted to be able to creatively have an outlet to where I could help the community and also kind of get people to buy into that same message about, our mantra is culture, community, and positivity, and how that can shine onto other people and make this world a better place just by doing the little things like we're called to do. So we basically came out with a shirt design that, was a tribute to whatever we were going to do that week that was telling my story. And it's since kind of evolved from just that to more of a clothing line / brand that pushes, it basically pushes those different aspects of the culture, community, and positivity. And, being able to give back to different charities and stuff has been awesome. We just from selling t-shirts, which I'm super proud of, and I think it's super cool. just from selling T-shirts for one season. We raised over $20,000 for various charities in the Atlanta area that were specific to Atlanta. So, at the end of the day, that's honestly one of my prouder accomplishments, is being able to do so many things for other people.
That's awesome. The website's allthingsloyal.com,
Correct.
allthingsloyal.com. So go check it out. See the great work Dansby's doing there, and all that's available at allthingsloyal.com. All right, last question. And if you've heard our podcast, Dansby, you know where I'm going. I've asked this many times. It's our question that we kind of close the podcast with all of our guests. In this season of life where he has you right now, what are you learning from the Lord? What is God teaching you right now?
Honestly, right now is, I'm not going to say tough, but dealing with injury is never fun. And kind of having things that I'm accustomed to having as far as physically being able to do stuff is not there. Because, I'm not completely one-handed, but, I'm very limited on what I can do with weights, and I can't hit, and I can't do baseball stuff. So It kind of has taken a different challenge on me mentally, and helping me to learn about how to deal with, anxious thoughts, and how to deal with not necessarily having everything that I want, and how to battle through that, and really develop a different kind of sense of strength of mind mentally through confidence and securities and things like that. And it's not been easy, it really hasn't. I'm definitely confident enough to say that, but I'm working through it, and I got great people around me that help me with that. So that's probably the biggest thing right now. And like I said, it's not fun, it isn't, but at the same time, I do really believe and have the faith that it will ultimately take me to a height that, I want to be at, and that probably is bigger and better than I could have ever even wished for anyways.
Well, hopefully we're looking back a year from now, we get you back on the podcast and we say, see, he had it all taken care of, right?
Exactly. And that's usually how it turns out. You just got to keep plucking away at it. My dad always told me, keep on keeping on, and that's what I'll always do.
That's it. He's Dansby Swanson, the Atlanta Braves shortstop. Get healthy, my friend. We really appreciate you being here on the podcast, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. It was fun, and I can't wait to be on it again.
And many thanks to Dansby Swanson, the Atlanta Braves shortstop, for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You can give him a follow over on Twitter, and he has maybe the greatest Twitter handle that I can think of. It's Lieutenant Dan's 7. Lieutenant Dan's 7. If you don't know what Lieutenant Dan is, that is the name of the friend of Forrest Gump, of course, in that movie, played by Tom Hanks, Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan. And so his handle is Lieutenant Dan, and then the letter S, and then the number 7 on Twitter. Give him a follow. Let him know that you heard this interview here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. We wish him a speedy recovery and hopefully a great 2019 season for Dansby, and certainly a long and productive Major League Baseball career for Mr. Swanson. So we thank Dansby for joining us. We thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Of course, find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at sports_spectrum. You can go and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we have videos and content, all sorts of great content there, including every single podcast. And then we want to encourage you to go to sportspectrum.com, and what you can do there, certainly read all the articles on the intersection of sports and faith. Our daily devotional is up there every morning at 6 a.m. to get your day started in the Lord, intersecting sports and faith. But I really want you to take a look at our magazine. And the only way to get that magazine is to subscribe to the Sports Spectrum magazine. Now, if you go to the website, sportspectrum.com, click the subscribe button, and you'll see it. If you're on a mobile device, you got to kind of scroll towards the bottom. But if you're on a desktop, it's right there on the right-hand side. And subscribe to the magazine. It's $18, a great deal, just $18 for an entire year. Get you our quarterly magazine. We also have a free issue that we want to send you, sort of a welcome magazine, thanking you for becoming part of the Sports Spectrum family. And it's a great tool. I mean, it's a magazine that you can hand to someone, a college student, maybe a youth group, certainly in a sports setting like a team situation or a men's ministry. It's a really great outreach tool, and it's an awesome magazine. John and Aaron do an awesome job putting this thing together. So check it out, sportspectrum.com. Subscribe for just $18 for an entire year. I promise you will love our magazine. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time with a brand new episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day.